Hello, I'm Charlie Wells, and welcome to Self Matters, the podcast where we interview the people shaping the future of mental health. This week, I'm super excited to introduce Vanessa Boachie. And the reason I'm really excited about Vanessa is we've had lots of scientists, we've had lots of academics, we've had all sorts of interesting people on this podcast. But Vanessa is not only a CBT clinician, but she's also a founder, CEO of an organization that's trying to take that knowledge to effectively change the world a little bit. They've done workshops and training and psychological knowledge sharing with organizations such as the BBC, the NHS, House of Commons, the Crown Prosecution Service, lots of big systems change thinking. So Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So as everyone knows, we always like to find out about the people behind the story, right? So I'd love to find out a little bit more about who is Vanessa? How did you start? Why did you become a CBT therapist? But then ultimately, why did you decide to become a founder?
Sure. So Vanessa is someone who grew up in Newham. I remember my neighbors growing up. We had people from Africa. We had people from Asia on the other side. So I would walk home and I'll be smelling lots of different cuisines. And I think that's what really excited me about growing up and living in Newham. We had international days, and for those international days, everyone would bring their different cultural foods. We'll do different dances. We'll taste different juices, drinks, learn lots about the culture and learn lots about different traditions as well. So that was something that really inspired me as a person, and even just the lens that I use to view the world, looking at things from an intersectional lens. I guess I'm also someone who is very passionate about people being able to live their lives to the best of their abilities. A big foundation of that is understanding who you are as a person, and also understanding your mental health and well-being. Improving any other areas of your life does start with improving your mental health and well-being in order to thrive, reach all the goals that you want to achieve, have the best relationships, have a flourishing life. That all starts with looking after your mental health. So in all aspects of my life, whether that's personal or professional, I'm the big advocate for people being able to actually live their life to the best of their ability.
And where do you think that started? Were you interested in psychology at school?
I guess I would say psychology found me, and I know that's a typical thing to say. So I actually started in the creative field. So when I was younger, I wanted to become an actor, went to drama school for a little bit as well, really enjoyed it, but it was also quite stressful. And there was also pressures within the context of, the creative industry, but also pressures from my family who wanted me to go down a more academic route. And so I've always been someone who's interested in understanding the human mind, human behavior, why people do things the way that they do. I wasn't going to go and study medicine, even though that's what my family wanted me to do. So I think upon doing some research, the closest that I would go was psychology. And that's what led me to the path of, I guess, studying psychology, and also just being intrigued by why people do things the way that they do. I'm also the firstborn daughter who grew up in a Ghanaian British household as well. Being the firstborn daughter, that also, in a way, trained you to be a deputy parent as well. In a way, it was a deputy parent for my younger brother, looking after him. I'm quite close to him as well. Through having that responsibility, I think naturally I'm someone who likes to look after people as well. And so those experiences, coupled with my experiences growing up, really led me to think, okay, do you know what? I do want to get into the helping profession. Like I mentioned, I'm not going to study medicine. The best that I'm going to do, the place I'm going to go is psychology. That's where the journey began.
I love the idea of a helping profession or a caring profession. You mentioned earlier that having a sort of strong sense of self and understanding yourself is important to your philosophy. I find it interesting that someone who's interested in psychology and has got a strong sense of understanding who you are wants to go into acting, which feels like it's almost the opposite, right? It's trying to project someone that you are not. So where did your interest in self come from?
It came from my experiences. I remember being in secondary school and I would experience my heart rate just increasing really fast. I would also get stomach aches and tension in my body. And at that time, those chest pains that I was experiencing, I genuinely believed that there was something physically wrong with me, thinking that I'm going to die, essentially. And I found that it continued. And over time, it felt like what I was experiencing here was getting worse. There was one day where the symptoms got really, really intense, and I decided to call emergency services. That was the only thing I knew to do. Gave them a call, described my symptoms, explained what I was going through. And it's quite interesting because the lady that I was speaking to on the other end of the phone explained that the symptoms that I'm experiencing may be anxiety or panic attack. I was like, oh, okay. For me at that time, I believed that panic attacks were more people, I don't know, waving about frantically and being very hyper and things like that. So to think that something that I'm experiencing internally could be something that's related to what's perhaps going on for me in my life, that really was an eye opener. That knowledge actually did help to ease my symptoms because I knew that this is not something that is going to kill me. I'm not going to die. What it is linked to the stress, the anxiety. Upon reflection, anyway, it made me realize that it's probably not just me who's experiencing this. The fact that my mom didn't even have the knowledge, or I didn't have the mental health literacy to be able to actually articulate that this is anxiety. It made me understand that it's something that is quite common where people do not understand what's going on in their minds and in their bodies.
You decided not to be an actor or a doctor, but you decided you wanted to become a therapist. Was that always what you wanted to do with your psychology and CBT knowledge? Did you always assume that you would sit down with people and treat people?
No, it wasn't something that I assumed I would be doing actually. So it's quite funny because I actually started Inside Out Wellbeing before training to be a CBT therapist. So after I finished my psychology degree, I started working in a rehabilitation recovery home, and I was working with people who had been experiencing severe mental health difficulties such as psychosis, schizophrenia, severe depression, OCD. And I was always curious to understand how do these mental health challenges develop and people's stories, what happened in their lives and how they ended up being institutionalized. One of the things that I realized was that there's lots of different factors involved, but one of them being that mental health literacy was lacking and people did not have an awareness of mental health or basic ways to look after themselves. I'm a strong believer that prevention is better than cure. So, of course, being able to even know small techniques or tools that you can use to look after yourself, I think is absolutely fundamental. And I think another thing that I realized as well was that there was a lot of people from racialized communities who were institutionalized as well. So again, thinking about why, what is going on here, what contributing towards that too. So what I did was do an event to raise awareness about mental health within the community. I thought, let's call it Inside Out Wellbeing because we're looking at getting what's from the inside out. We had creatives and mental health professionals come and talk about their experiences. 180 people turn up. I was like, oh, okay, this is something that people are interested in. And then following from that, people were asking me, Vanessa, when is the next one? When are we doing the next one? So that led on to event after event after event, where we're simply just raising awareness about mental health within the community. We incorporated creativity around this as well, tapping into my previous experience in the creative world. So we did mental health and music events. We did a theatre production about mental health. We did fitness and mental health events. And then the pandemic hit. We weren't able to do physical face-to-face events anymore. So we had to re-strategize and think about, okay, where is this actually going? Personally, at the time, I thought this will be the end of Inside Out, that we're not going to be able to continue. I might have to think of another business to run or do something else in my life. But what we found was that there was an increase in demand for our services. So that's where we had to change the structure, change the business model as well. It was actually starting this project Inside Out that inspired me to train as a therapist. And so went on to become a wellbeing practitioner and then did the CBT training as well. And so alongside building Inside Out Wellbeing and also building my career so that the two can, in a way, marry together so I can support people in the best way possible.
It's not typical for a recent graduate to turn around and say, let's start a business. Most people either spend a couple of years trying to get onto a PhD course or going and doing some volunteer work in the NHS or going to get a grad job somewhere. What do you think it was about you that said, hold on a second, I've been doing this work experience and there is a problem, and the problem is knowledge, and I know I can share knowledge, so I'm going to do something about it. Why do you think you did that?
That's a really good question. I'm a doer. I'm an active person. So if I see that there's a problem, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to try my best to be proactive about it. My experiences up until that point really led me to believe that we need to be talking about mental health. We can look after ourselves from the inside out, but it all just starts with us being able to have that education. I think education is so powerful. It's such a important tool. It's the difference between being able to get the correct support and not getting the right support.
You did your first event, loads of people turned up, but there must have been a point where you said, oh, hold on a second, this can become something real rather than just kind of a thing I do on the side. How did you make that choice in your life?
You're really speaking about the biggest struggle that I've had, really. It was a huge struggle. I never saw myself as a founder or as a CEO. I just wanted to support people, to look after their mental health, just wanted to share mental health education. I'm glad that I did that at that time because I didn't wait until I was an expert in an area to be able to share the little that I had. I think my philosophy at that time was the little that I have, if I can share it and it helps one person, then great. We've done our job here. Over time, lots of people were asking me questions. People were coming to me asking for advice or coming to me asking me to speak at their events or to deliver workshops. We started to get quite a bit of traction as well. So it was actually from the feedback that I received from other people where I realized that, okay, do you know what? This can actually turn into something. We're getting booked by corporations, we're getting booked by organizations. People want to hear us speak. People want us to do panel discussions, things like that. We had to think about how do we make this sustainable in the long run? So it did get up to a point where I think for the first couple of years, the company was run through vibes and passion. And then we had to think about what business structures to put in place. As a result of that, we then decided that there's going to be a particular model that we have where at the heart of Inside Out, we are focusing on our beneficiaries. And that's people who are least likely to access mental health and wellbeing support. But at the same time, what we actually want to do is provide training opportunities with corporates, with organizations. So for every session that's booked with us, we will then fund a free session in the community for people who are least likely to access mental health support. Overall, we went on a journey from being a small project to fast forward 2024. We're actually one of the leading providers of culturally informed wellbeing support in the UK. And yeah, that's something that it's been a journey. It's been a big journey, but I'm really proud to say that, yeah, we're still going.
And you should be. It's an amazing achievement. I spent a lot of time kind of digging around websites, and all the stories are really quite remarkable. With Inside Out, you've built this intervention model, which involves workshops and education and various other things. But you've also created this specialist understanding around intersectionality. Why do we need a different view of how psychology works?
It's quite interesting because I was actually surprised that this hadn't been a thing, especially because if we're thinking about identity and who we are, it shapes the way that we think about things. It shapes the things that we do. It shapes the way that we interact with people. So I was quite confused as to why this hadn't been embedded in mental health support. Through my experience working in public services, what I found was that we are having that conversation about mental health. We are having that conversation about well-being. But what was missing is the part about identity and who we are. And considering that our identity is a huge part of what drives us and what forms the decisions that we make, and even the extent of how we look after ourselves, why are we not talking about it? So from there, what I did was do some more research about intersectionality and how that itself can form or can contribute to our mental health and well-being. So looking at the different parts of who we are and not even just looking at the different aspects of who we are, also looking at how those experiences combine to form our overall experience. So, for example, if we're looking at mental health support, if someone is accessing mental health support, what does that actually look like for someone who is from a racialized community, who also might be from the LGBTQ plus community, compared to someone who is not from a racialized community, who is not from LGBTQ plus community as well? I think it's important for us to tailor support in a way that takes into account what's really important to people's lives.
Intersectionality is one of those things that different people use in different ways, right? So some people mean actually understanding people's heritage and background. Some people mean it's their sexual preferences, life choices, body shape. What's interesting is I think it's the overlap of those kind of niches, right? How do you define you as an individual, but understanding the tribes with which you're associated? But in theory, that could get more and more and more segmented until you're a person of one, right? How important is it to understand cultural context of a group versus the individual experience of the person that is being treated?
Yeah, I think that's really, really, really fundamental. Sometimes when corporates look into diversity and inclusion training, they might put together, let's say, 3 days of cultural competency training. And then after the 3 days, well, hey, everyone is suddenly culturally competent. That's why I guess one of the key things that we look at is the idea behind cultural humility. And cultural humility does take into account that, of course, as we highlighted with intersectionality, it can get very specific down to the individual. So cultural humility is less about understanding what different people are doing in different areas and different cultures. Of course, that context is important and we do need to understand that. However, I think what can tend to happen is that people can get really focused on understanding the nuances within different cultures and different identities. And it can feel quite overwhelming and it can feel quite challenging. We can't all know everything about every single identity and every single culture. So, in a way, we're kind of on a mission impossible there when we're looking at competency by itself. And I just really want to highlight that I'm not saying that cultural competency is not important. That cultural awareness and cultural competency is fundamental, but that's not the only thing that we're looking at. And this is where cultural humility is about taking that internalized approach. So, really understanding yourself, understanding your worldview, and also taking that time to actually try and understand that individual's worldview as well. So, it's about, as the name suggests, essentially humbling yourself to be able to actually look at things through another person's perspective. I think with cultural humility, it's more of a skill that we tend to train people with. So then you can apply cultural humility to every individual that you encounter, as opposed to trying to learn every single thing about every single culture and every single identity. That's going to be challenging. So I think overall, to answer your question, it's about being able to actually have as much knowledge and awareness as you can. And the key word there is as you can within your capacity, but then also using that skill of cultural humility to really tailor support to that individual.
Culture humility should, in theory, trigger curiosity, right? As in, if I'm humble enough to be able to go, okay, I don't understand this. Can we have conversations about it? You can learn things. Whereas I think the idea of you have to know everything the whole time actually creates almost threat. People are worried about talking about things in case they get things wrong. So I think it's a wise way forward. I think society as a whole could benefit dramatically. So how do you teach that though in a workshop?
In our workshops, we'll really define and understand what cultural humility is versus cultural competency, or what cultural competency is versus cultural humility. And we'll go through the pillars of cultural humility as well. So we almost teach it like a skill. And rather than just knowledge sharing, what we do is go through a more experiential training. So essentially, we allow people to actually have tasks, immersive reflections that do help them to actually practice that cultural humility. If you're teaching someone how to drive, you teach them the fundamentals. And then with those fundamentals, they can then go off and drive for the rest of their life, essentially. So that's the way that we approach it, where we teach the fundamentals behind cultural humility, have our immersive activities. We also have the reflection tasks, the pillars, things like that. What we then emphasize is that it's something that needs to be practiced. So we would support organizations after the training to continuously practice that as well. We might suggest that cultural humility is something that, for example, people include within their supervision sessions as well. So then they're, again, allocating that time to actually practice those skills. We've had many organizations where after they've done the training with us, cultural humility and intersectionality has actually become part of their supervision agenda. And that's something that we want to push more. So it's not something that we are just adding on. It's something that is already included in the support that's being offered.
I am a 40-something white man who went to private school and Oxbridge. So I don't have many sort of diversity scores, but the vast majority of professors in psychology are white men. The vast majority of therapists are white women. And when you look at the reasons for that, it's because it's not the highest paid career path in the world. You are massively trained, right? And so you have to have either a really deep passion for it that you're going to drive through adversity, or you have to have a little bit of a foundation of privilege in order to go down that career path. And so it's not a very representative audience. And my co-founder, Dr. Amina Taylor, one of her big things is how do we get more diverse backgrounds into being therapists, not just into therapy? Because she thinks part of the access problem is therapy doesn't look like people who want to access therapy. How would you change that amongst the therapist community? Is there anything you could imagine doing with therapists to make them better at cultural humility?
I think a fundamental part of that is being actually included in training. So, for example, all of these things that I'm talking about around intersectionality and cultural humility, that's not something I was taught through my traditional CBT training. That's not something that we even considered or looked at. We did have a small module on diversity, but it was literally, from what I remember, it was probably 1 or 2 lectures. And even that itself just highlights how much it's undervalued. And again, that's why I try to push it as something that should be an everyday experience. It should be something that is embedded in day-to-day practice as well. So I think firstly, it starts with the training and with that awareness that this is an approach that we can use, because a lot of therapists may not necessarily be using cultural humility, which is such a shame, because it then means that from my perspective, there might be certain groups of people who are missing out from receiving adequate support. And I'm a really strong believer that adequate mental health and well-being support does take into account intersectionality and does take into account cultural humility as well. And I think the second part is even just people's willingness to actually go down this road, essentially, because when we're looking at developing cultural humility, essentially what we're saying is, are you willing to take up your lens, pull it down for a second, and put on someone else's lens? And for some people, they might not be willing to do that. They don't want to take off their lens. They don't want to see things from different perspectives as well. And so cultural humility is also an internal thing that does also require internal critique. Are you willing to, in a way, criticize yourself or accept criticism in order to be able to actually support other people? And that's where that humility aspect comes in, because a lot of people may not be ready for that internal work. I think there's a saying that we usually have, which is understanding leads to understanding. When you have that understanding of yourself and your own biases and your own lenses and things like that, that then helps to create that space for you to then put that to the side for a second and then understand things from other people's perspectives. So I think what personally I'm trying to push for, and Inside Out is trying to push for, is for more therapists and for more people, I think, general in the helping profession, to use cultural humility.
You don't just do workshops and training and advocacy. You're about to launch a big awards. Tell us a bit about the awards.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I noticed was that in other industries, there's lots of award ceremonies. But when it comes to the well-being and wellness and mental health space, it's not something that you come across often. And so did a bit of research to see what's out there. And yes, there are things out there to support people and to honor people who have been working in the mental health field. But I think it was something that I felt we needed to push a little bit more, especially because people are working day in, day out, putting so much work, putting so much effort, perhaps not even getting paid enough to actually support other people. And some people have put their lives on the line to support people as well, put themselves at risk to support other people. So for me, it's important that the people that are on the ground doing the work, have put the ideas together, are campaigning, supporting people. It's so fundamental that we support them. So back in 2022, actually, we decided to put together an award ceremony. And what makes this award ceremony quite special is that it takes into account what Inside Out is all about, which is diversity and inclusion within mental health and well-being. So we put together the UK's first well-being award ceremony that really honors people from diverse communities. And so what we really wanted to do was recognize people and say, we see what you're doing, we appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the great work. And that's why this year, so we weren't able to do it last year. This year, October the 10th, we decided to put on another award show, which I'm really, really, really super excited about. So we have had nominations already, but I'm still open to hearing suggestions for the future when we do awards as well. So feel free to drop us a message on our website, follow us on Instagram, social media platforms, and DM us.
Awesome. Should be a great event. I can't wait to hear who wins. You are running an award ceremony, you're running your workshops, you're running a business, you're being a therapist all at the same time. And because you're a founder CEO, you also have to be this beacon for psychological wellness the whole time. But it's stressful, right? What do you do to look after you? How do you stay calm, confident, impressive as a CEO and a therapist?
We need to top up our well-being bank account. So for me, topping up the well-being bank account is all about doing things and making investments and deposits into my well-being bank account. With the well-being bank account, you could either be in your overdraft, you could be just about balancing, or you can be in surplus. And of course, life happens from time to time. So it might take you across the overdraft, bring you back in balance, and then back to surplus again. But I am very conscious that I need to make sure that my cup is full before I can actually be the best version of myself, not just for myself, but also for the people that I'm supporting. Taking breaks is something that I find really, really fundamental for me in the work that I do. So once a week, I will have a reset. And that means no matter what's going on, I'm not looking at any emails, not looking at booking anything in. That's something that I do for myself. And that's the time that I usually have for myself as well. Might go to the spa, go to the sauna, steam room, just that time to just immerse myself in being present. So that's something that I do on a weekly basis. And then every year as well, I like to have a month off. So that month off is actually starting from Monday, actually. I will be taking a break. So a break for the month. And during that time, I'll be traveling as well. So traveling is something that I believe allows me personally to be present and to experience different cultures, experience different things, different sites, new environment, take in new things. So for me, being able to actually just take a break, go on holiday, reset, come back in September, especially because from September onwards, that's when it starts to get very busy for us. So I think, yeah, the whole team are taking August off basically to be able to reset. So overall, I would say one thing that is fundamental for me to actually keep doing the work that I do is topping up my wellbeing bank account. And I think you guys should do so too.
I love the idea of topping up wellbeing bank account. I suspect you're going to have a lot of job applicants hit your website today when they find out they could get the whole of August off. Let's assume you were given the magic wand or made prime minister of the world or something for a day, what would be the one big thing you would change? Anything that you think could have the biggest impact on improving everyone's well-being bank accounts?
I would say, I think it comes back to mental health education. That's something that I would roll out in schools. It's something that I would have public health campaigns on and include that in commercials, in between TV programs, even at the cinema, ads there. I think for me, really campaigning about mental health and even just the basics, understanding that link between the mind and the body, understanding the fight flight response, understanding stress and the impacts of that as well. I think these really, really fundamental things are things that people don't even know about. Even sometimes when I'm in therapy sessions, I hear quite often people say, I wish I knew this when I was younger. I wish I knew this when I was in school. So I would roll out a huge public health campaign to the whole world, a global mental health campaign.
More and more in school, kids are doing stuff about well-being and stress, but no one talks to them about the kind of first principles behind that. As you said, like the fight-flight response is why you be triggered by certain things. If we can get education, not just here are some things you can do, but this is why these things help. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for topping up my mental well-being bank account with positive energy today.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Self Matters. We've got new episodes out every 2 weeks, so make sure you hit follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and of course watch us on YouTube. As always, head over to our social media channels to find out who'll be joining us in the next episode. That's all for today though. See you next time.